So we have a special panel here. Do a very brief self-introduction. Let's start from Grayson.
Hey, so I'm Grayson, and I'm a law student at Emory University. I'm also a showrunner with the Infrared Show. Most popular YouTuber on it is Hazaldin. And yeah, I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I go to school there, and I'm happy to be here.
And I'm Jackson Hinkle. I'm the host of The Dive, which is an independent publication that I run in America. I'm based in Miami, Florida, and I focus mostly on foreign policy-based news, and I'm very happy to be here. It's my first time in China, and I'm loving it, so thank you.
Jackson. Welcome to you all. And, well, we have a lovely panel, and I want to begin this panel by, first I want to look at the very special guest here, I think. Not to say everybody else is not special, but I want to begin with you, Jackson, because your experience seemed to be very representative of the journey, the kind of political journey that American youth is going through right now at the moment. I searched you on Wikipedia, okay, so I found out you are a Californian surfer boy.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, and California, as far as we know, is a liberal bubble out there in the U.S., and you used to be very active in environmental activism. So, but when Chinese people, when we talk about green activism, we think of Greta Thunberg, we think of just stop oil, the kind of very radical thing. And I wonder, how come you changed, you grew from that very radical progressive youth into someone who sort of hopped on the MAGA train, okay? You want to mobilize the American working class people who's categorized by the mainstream media to be on the far right. And then even more strange, you call yourself a MAGA communist. Yes. And communism is not even in the political spectrum in America. It's to the very extreme, more extreme than extreme left in America. So how is that possible? How could you jump so freely across the spectrum?
Well, I will try to answer that as succinctly as possible. Growing up in California definitely is a liberal bubble, but for me, growing up as someone who was just an average, American kid, I loved to surf, I loved to play basketball. I lived in a beach town. I was concerned with, basically keeping my house in order, keeping the beach that I surfed at clean, those sorts of things. That's what I was concerned with. And from there, I started to get interested in, political ideology and national politics, and from there, foreign policy, because I realized how much influence America holds on the global stage. And when I started to get interested in it, it was during the time of the Bernie Sanders 2016 campaign. And Bernie Sanders, alongside with Donald Trump, were the only candidates who were really critical of NATO. They were critical of various foreign policy interventions in Iraq, Afghanistan, which were, some of the biggest of the time, Syria as well, and Venezuela, what we were doing with sanctions there. And I realized that a lot of what I had been force-fed through my education as a young individual was all propaganda. It was all just, they sell us this lie that we're going and invading these countries for democracy because they're bad dudes, and that's what we have to do. So I was really interested in Bernie Sanders. I felt like a lot of the individuals who were associated with the Trump campaign in 2016 were more establishment figures, and that was true. But throughout the Trump presidency, as he, went on through his 4 years, he began to get rid of those establishment figures and replace them with more figures that I think truly do toe an anti-imperialist line on various issues, like Colonel Douglas Macgregor, who's been a sound voice on the Russia-Ukraine war, and others. And even more than that, to your question about MAGA communism, the fact of the matter is the MAGA movement, casting aside Trump for a second, the MAGA movement is a purely, patriotic American movement of working class individuals that feel as though they've been screwed over by the establishment, whether it's the warmongers, whether it's big pharma, whether it's Wall Street, and that is true. And I think it's the first time that we've had a real consciousness of class in any major political movement in recent history, and I think we as communists should be welcome to that movement and help, integrate that into a more formal political movement that will continue to call out the establishment rather than go along with their lies. So I think that for everyone who calls the MAGA movement far right, I think it's a misunderstanding. I don't think they are. I've been to countless Trump rallies and Trump events, and you speak to the average people and they say, we don't trust the bankers, we don't trust, the individuals that are lying to us about, big pharma issues or about war. And all they want is a country that will focus on development, manufacturing, trade with the world's largest partners like Russia and like China, while also making an economy that prioritizes the working class. So I think that's what they want, and in essence, that is communism.
So they want a country, not an empire. That
yeah, I think
a normal country. America is a country, it can be prosperous, can have its own industry.
There's no American that you will go to, an average American that's working a 9-to-5 job, that will tell you that sending $200 billion to Ukraine is in their best interests. Mm-hmm. No one believes that. Mm-hmm. So I think the overarching goals of the establishment are so far away from what the people of our country truly want, need, and believe, and that's why you're seeing this outsider political movement have such dominance in the American political arena.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Then I want to go to Grayson. I think, because I think Jackson mentioned in one of his interviews that one of his biggest influences he had was from your media outfit called Infrared, right? And you run at Infrared. You're one of the runners.
Yeah, so some background on Infrared. We're a media collective. Mm-hmm. So the most prominent member is Haas, who does live streaming. But we actually began around 2016, probably around the Trump election, as just this very informal study group. And maybe a few years ago, we decided to go public. We would start experimenting with live streaming, with publications of certain types on blogs. But the orienting spirit was to try and reinvent or rediscover the meaning of Marxism-Leninism in the American context, which is, of course, a very heavy thing. And in 2016, this was sort of all the rage. But we were ahead of the curve, I think, in understanding a lot of the geopolitical fissures that have come to fruition recently. As far as Infrared's innovation, I think MAGA communism, Jackson is absolutely the most prominent advocate for right now. It's made a surprising effect in American politics. And we have articles on Vice that are addressing this specter that's kind of haunting maybe some circles of American politics. And just maybe to go on with the point that he made, we don't see any real contradiction between the spirit of being an American and the idea of communism and what that means for America's working class. With MAGA communism, of course, we can go into this as this show progresses. The contradiction is only apparent. When you dig down to it, what we're doing with MAGA communism is no different than what Marxist-Leninists have done in every successful revolution in history. It's taking the ideas of Marxism and meeting the working class at the level of consciousness that it's currently at, which today is in MAGA. Now, that doesn't mean endorsing or tailing the most backwards elements of MAGA. It doesn't mean, for example, endorsing everything Trump says or Bannon and so on. But it means going down to the people and learning from them and working with them and trying to advocate oneself as a champion of the people, to gain their trust and to gain leadership over the working class to lead them to some victory.
That's interesting. So I want to ask Jackson, because you do a lot of, you tweet a lot, yeah, and you interact with people from all walks of life. I see you go on different shows. Sometimes you can change their views, sometimes you can't. And sometimes you go into the shows knowing that there's this very strong hostility against you. They will call you all sorts of bad things, Russian spy, to name a few. Okay, so why do you want to still go there? You seem to have it's kind of a missionary conviction that you want to change them, make an effect.
Well, I think it's twofold. The reason why I and everyone up here does the work we do is because point A is we see that there is a lot of injustice in this world, I don't mean like social justice. I mean like horrific wars or sanctions, these sorts of things, or even trade wars that can have really negative impacts on civilians in various countries that the West, and specifically the United States, should be working with. You know, we should have win-win cooperation, not a negative, hostile approach with nations like Russia and China, BRICS nations, for example. My dream would be for the United States to integrate with, you know, BRICS and the Belt and Road Initiative. I know it's funny, but the Russians laugh too when I say that. But it is a dream. You know, I think it'd be beautiful. And the other aspect of it is not just the injustice that other people are facing, but as an American who has lived in various parts of my country, seen a lot of my country, and myself who has lived at various economic strata throughout my life, I can see that the policies that Washington, D.C. has adopted and run with for the past several decades, you know, since before I was born, are actually hurting the American people. I mean, whether it's our outsourcing of American jobs, whether it's the hyper-focus on Wall Street and financial capital, reigning above all else, reigning above manufacturing, like good jobs that our people need, whether it's the wars and the foreign policy. I mean, none of that helps actual Americans. And as an American patriot, you know, my family came here on the Mayflower to America. They fought in the American Revolution. They fought in the Civil War. They fought in World War II. It's disgusting what the people who are leading our country are doing in our name.
True American. Wow. Okay. And next I want to go to you, Roundface. Okay, so weird. Okay, I want to ask you, because you are an internet celebrity just like Jackson. Jackson has huge following on X. How many?
2.4 million.
Million. Wow, that's a very, very sizable number. What about you on Bilibili?
Almost 4 million.
Oh my God. Well, remember, China is 4 times the population. Roundface, you cover that a lot, how this called bread and circus in America.
Yeah, it's pretty cool because diaspora is living abroad. Those are Chinese living in Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and other engineers. Very high tech working in those companies like NVIDIA. Very famous and popular live stream happening on Chinese TikTok these days is a engineer in NVIDIA telling, almost crying to the host, saying he saw his Taiwan province colleague posting his son, at that time son, having his genital removed because being confirmed by his elementary teacher that he's not he, but she.
He was what? His what? It's they.
His son, his colleagues from Taiwan province, and the colleague's son being confirmed by his elementary school teacher that he's a girl and need to have his genital removed. So the colleague actually posting the removed genital in his Twitter account and let all other people see as a very glorified or even proud pomposity to show, oh, now it's a newborn for my daughter.
Wow.
So that frightened this engineer. He's earning a lot, like $1 million per year. And the next day he's holding his wife and son and daughter coming back to China. It's frightening. So it's something we see or probably don't see because media monopoly. They don't just they just don't post it. But if you see that, it really deeply touches everybody. It touches our nerves. So a lot of people, when I speak to, especially Southern Asian like Malaysia or Indian, they say they anticipate China being the shield, to shield, defend not only Chinese kids but all Asian kids from this corruption or even poisoning of so-called wokeness education spreading from U.S. now to all the UK and Commonwealth countries and Netherlands, whatever, to everywhere.
China is the ages of traditional value to guard against. What do you think, Grayson?
I think the irony is that what communists have been criticized for, by the right especially, is being anti-traditional, being the kind of vanguard of just like abstract and anti-popular trends, whether it be the kind of drastic surgeries that he's speaking about, or other kind of just innovations in the way that we conceive of our social relations in general, between men and women, between kids and their parents, and so on. And there's a degree to which the culture war is very important. And we don't have to go into it, but it is tied up with class warfare. But there's a lot of ways in which the culture war issues are used by our ruling establishment, by the right and the left, Democrats and the Republicans, so the right against itself. There's a way in which that's being used to just divide the American people's attention. I mean, the amount, for example, of culture war issues that this gets in the news has increased exponentially since the 2008 financial crisis. Now, why is that? It's because the elites are trying to distract from the fact that the American people are not getting a good deal. The inflation is out of the roof. We're getting dragged into more and more very dangerous scenarios that could engulf the whole world into a world war. So these issues serve to keep the American people divided amongst themselves, squabbling over petty issues. These cases are very extreme, but they're not widespread. The reason why the media pays so much attention to them, I think, is because, number one, it makes money, right? These are very lucrative stories. The other reason is that it keeps people dumb. It keeps them fighting over things that don't ultimately affect them. And I think this is a big trick that the ruling establishment has used to keep the American people docile and unorganized.
So is that a conspiracy?
You can call it what you want. I don't think conspiracies have to be exactly conscious.
Okay.
You don't have to imagine, even if it is the case, Davos, which are conspiring in a room.
So it doesn't have to be some people in a secret room planning exactly that we want American people to be dumb, so we do X and Y.
No, I think that you can look at a lot of politics, what people call the deep state, which has a reality. That doesn't necessarily mean some Illuminati room where people are conspiring. It just means a confluence of interests, which have the same class interests, ultimately, is what a Marxist would say. And that this forms a network, which we can call a deep state, which is outside democratic accountability. It's the institutions of society, the bureaucracies, which are unelected, the various NGOs, which have a huge, huge sway in both American and in world opinion. And you were speaking about the spread of wokeness across the world. It's spread within the United States, too. I mean, this is something that is not necessarily widespread in America. It gets a lot of pushback. But it's the same billionaires, the same oligarchs, we can use this language, who are funding these very strange trends through their NGOs to keep the American people docile.
So you want to have a fighting spirit?
We want a fighting spirit.
Fight against?
The establishment. Now, we think that that means giving the people an alternative, which they have lacked for decades. There was a strong American labor movement in the 1900s, but it failed. Now, why did it fail? It failed for multiple reasons, but it primarily failed because the left was weak. The left ultimately was weak. It was beholden to the academy, to the institutions. And because of that, I think you have a lot of problems with the modern left being unable to fundamentally challenge the ruling elite.
The ruling elite. And the media, established media, they often accuse you guys of throwing daggers at George Soros. Unfairly, and you attacked him. And I think it's from a left, sort of American leftist position to say that people on the right are spewing conspiracy to, tarnish the reputation of open society, of George Soros. What do you think?
It's no more conspiracy.
No more conspiracy. It's open secret.
Yeah, it's open secret, but it's no more conspiracy to say that they are dividing up the American public on these issues. Or, in my case, when it came to the war in Ukraine, George Soros funded a bunch of media NGOs that got people banned for speaking out in a pro-Russian narrative. So that happened to me, but it's no more a conspiracy than I guess it is to point out the obvious fact that George Soros, Pierre Omidyar, these billionaires are behind a lot of the foreign influence meddling campaigns that they engage in through not just the CIA anymore, but through the National Endowment for Democracy, through the NED's various media organizations that they weaponize, even here in China. So I think it's very apparent what they're doing, and it's criminal. Unfortunately, they're the ones who make the laws, so they'll never, meet justice.
I just want to follow the money. Take what you said removal and spread of wokeness, especially telling kids to change their gender. The money, where the money goes, the big pharma, right? Once you accept that your gender is not your gender, the big point is you need to continuously changing your gender. If you're not changing, you're not taking drugs. Right? Once you accept your gender is not your gender, you need to change your gender. Then surgery comes. You need the inflammatory drugs. Right? You open new gate to rare, never heard names of. I can talk this all day, like tacrolimus, all kinds of immunosuppressant. Right? On average, The Guardian actually reported a transgender woman actually regret her decision in 7-year-old by her at that time his elementary school teacher, and right now she needs to take about 80 pounds per day immunosuppressant drug. Every single one being transferred, they literally being converted into living bonanza for this big pharma. So you need to take it every single day. There's no exceptions. And with your age growing, the testosterone and other hormones fluxing, you need to take more supplements, right? That's huge money. So considering U.S. as no offense, like it was like the 20% of GDP, right, for the U.S. right now. So they have this capacity to expand more. So that's something that really terrifies me. Look, we need to focus on very specific instances right now, hurting the people. Right. Talking about complex, abstract concepts every day with those theoretics or politicians saying democracy, freedom, but having their kids telling them to cut genitals is evil. It's pure evil. So that's my point.
Right. And I want to ask you specifically, because I think there is a very great distrust in institutions. When you talk about the emergence of conspiracy, is referring to those institutions like education institutions, the colleges, to teach you, to enlighten you, to tell you what is not a conspiracy, what is the real thing that's happening. And people don't believe in institutions. People think those colleges are teaching wokeness to our kids. So the colleges themselves are in the front line of a cultural war, and people, especially I think people on the right, the more conservative Americans, they have a very high level of distrust. So what's the future?
It's hard to speculate about the future, except the fact that what's going on now cannot subsist. It's going to come to an end, but how it comes to an end is an open question. Now, onto conspiracies, I think you hit the nail on the head. The fact that conspiracy theories of all types, some very schizophrenic, some more or less rational, it's evidence of the fact that people don't feel like the democratic institutions are reflecting them. They are sensing some kind of infernal forces which are somehow acting behind the scenes without democratic accountability. And they're struggling to pin down what that is. So they come up with all sorts of ways of explaining that. Some are totally whack job. You have a rise of anti-Semitism, for an example, in a very limited sense because of this. You have reactionary politics, which is a response to this. It's trying to explain what this conspiracy is. And what Marxism endeavors to do is to try and give a real explanation for this conspiracy. And in some sense, to have a people's conspiracy, which may be something of a radical thing to say. But
I like that.
It's a people's conspiracy against the elite. Now, to give a more grounded explanation for where things are going, there are fundamental economic changes at work, which no one can deny. People call it the Fourth Industrial Revolution. We would say in orthodox Marxism, it's a revolution in the forces of production, right? Now, to the extent that conspiracies are real amongst the ruling elite in Davos, in the World Economic Forum, it's the extent that these institutions, these actually existing institutions, have a vested interest in making sure that they survive these fundamental transformations. And I think this helps explain why BlackRock, for example, is buying up all this property in America, why you have a monopolization by finance capital, even at the expense of industrial capital, which traditionally has been the critique of Marxist economics. And I think that this fundamental transformation, I think that those attending these meetings, Davos, World Economic Forum, and so on, I think they're very aware of this, and they're trying to unleash some kind of fundamental transformation in America to ensure the survival of these institutions. For us, the extent that we're progressive, if these institutions must perish because of these economic changes, then let them. And let something new be born out of this. Let something that reflects it authentically be born out of this. And that is the historical operation of communists. Accelerate the forces of production, the revolutions of the force of production, and reflect this politically.
Can I chip in?
Yeah, of course.
I think it's quite interesting that you use the term people's conspiracy. I mean, coming from a Marxist point of view, there are sort of 3 layers of explanation towards that. One thing, Marx coined the term of scientific socialism, right? Which is precisely targeting against that use of conspiracy. It's like a discrimination. To say that forget about the rest of the socialist rhetoric that is floating around in the 19th century, even before that in Europe. Of course, religion, like a particularly Christian religion, has a socialist orientation. But Marx says, no, these are all merely groundless. We want to provide a scientific explanation to that. And one thing that he relies on to manifest the scientific element is the political-economic analysis of the society, which brings forward the terminology of class. And the class is not only just a illusion coming from the Marxist head. A class is based on a solid scientific calculation, explanation of how the capitalist society work. And he brings forward the terms that capitalism. This is why I call this capitalism is fundamentally about depriving people with their, exploiting people with their surplus. All right, there is formulas and calculations behind that, but that's not the end. And a further thing that he provides is very based on the humanities side, which is historical materialism. And we talk about historical materialism as if this is merely just a terminology that's floating around among Marx. But fundamentally, what Marx is trying to argue is that what we are imagining, the problem of today, is based on our scientific observation of the past. And that past is not only just about cherry-picking things that we are interested in, but it is a shared human past. And not only that, why do we bother to look at the past? Marx wants to argue that there is a shared common future that is waiting ahead. It's fundamentally based on the science. So what we can say is scientific materialism or historical materialism is not just about explaining the status quo, what happened, and what leads to the current situation, but helping us to envision, to have the believe that the future is going to be like that. But that still remains as a utopia. That comes to the third element, which brings forward by Lenin, the idea of a vanguard party. There is no way human will achieve salvation by themselves. We are naturally prone to nasty stuff, to lazy stuff. To me, if there is no obligation to fulfill, I would rather lay in bed and do nothing. But here comes Lenin. The Leninist argument says that people need a leader, but that kind of a leader is not an elitist leader. The kind of elitism that is manifested in many of the right-wing conspiracy theories, like the status quo, the sort of the haves and the have-nots versus the have-not, the 1%. Lenin argues that fundamentally people need a revolutionary prophecy, but that prophecy is not based on one individual. It is based on a salvation of a collective, that is the political party itself, the Communist Party itself. The Communist Party, henceforth, we could hear from Chairman Mao's word, coming from the people, learn from the people, but elevated people afterwards. So there is very intrinsic circulation between the elites, the revolutionary elites, and the people. That learn from the people, not necessarily subscribe to all of the things that the people says, but at the same time, do not disregard the people's needs. So empowering mass through self-transformation. That is the job of the vanguard parties. I think that's sort of what I want to chip in.
Yeah, and I think if I can just chip in
Vanguards.
again, with vanguards. With the last part, I think is especially relevant of this dialectic between the people and the people's organization, with the party. There's a sense in which that's exactly what we're trying to do with this label MAGA Communism. It's simply not to write people off just because of their ideological dispositions, which is idealistic, that proceeds simply from what people are thinking, not their objective class basis. You can kind of see how this functions in America today. I mean, when the Canadian truckers were going on strike, not that long ago, what was the American left's and the Canadian left's response? It was condemnation. It was, these are fascists. These are white supremacists. Now, why were they saying that? These are working class truckers. These are the bread and butter of the American and Canadian economy. Saying that because of their ideological stance, the fact that their consciousness is not at the level of socialist consciousness in their view. Their view, by the way, being a product of the universities, of the state. The only thing I would say is that, and I totally agree with what you said about historical materialism, it's very important. When we talk about conspiracy, it's not to return to Blanqui. It's a 19th century kind of conspiratorial pre-Marxist socialist. We still believe that there is a duty for the party to be rooted in the people, rooted in the masses. Just like Lenin believed. The party may be small, but it needs to reflect the will of the people. And when we talk about a people's conspiracy, all we mean is to have a partisan party that's fighting on behalf of the people, which is able to meet the transformations that are at work by the elites with our own transformations. If I can put it a bit radically, there's going to be a great reset either way. Okay, this is the language of the great reset. That's going to happen either way. It's inevitable. It's a part of historical materialism. This results from actually existing political economy today. The duty of Marxists is to form a party that can lead the people through this, that doesn't land them in a kind of precarious situation, that doesn't mean that they own nothing and be happy, but returns them to a state where they run their country, where they feel like they are represented in their country, where they're not alienated in the ways that they are exposed to today. And I think this is very important for Marxists in America to grasp, that there's an objective element, like you said, in scientific socialism. It's not simply imagining a utopia, a fiction, and imposing it on the world. It's discovering what is real about socialism today and trying to reflect this in a politically conscious manner.
Yeah, I think that's quite valuable, and probably what I'm going to say next is going to be treading on a very dangerous territory, because many of the languages that from the right or left on the conspiracy side seems to reflect some of the languages during the revolutionary time. For example, the Great Reset itself is fundamentally a class revolution, and the ideal of what you just said, the people's conspiracy, is what we described as people's consciousness or working class consciousness. The consciousness cannot just being bestowed upon you. Consciousness needs to grow from below, and the consciousness is also not only just an intellectual movement, it is a physical, it is a realistic, it is a life experience that you acquire this consciousness through struggle. The language of struggle again emerged, kind of corresponds to the conspiracy theories language. So to that aspect of, I mean, I have to confess that I come with a suspicion, but now I think what you just described, based on what you just described, the MAGA communism seems to have some sort of a common ground that we could discover.
And the other thing is, like, the term conspiracy theorist in America has become such a muddied and funny term because, 5 years ago, if someone was called a conspiracy theorist in the press, it was, you're blackballed, you're not allowed on the news stations. If you're called a conspiracy theorist now, what that means is, in America, that you just got the news correct, maybe 2 months too early. If you said that Europe's economy was going to suffer by sanctioning Russia, you were called a conspiracy theorist. But now average Americans, when they hear the term conspiracy theorist, just like how they hear the term misogynist or in some, not brash cases like racist even, it's just become such a muddy term that's overused by the liberal establishment that it's almost, conspiracy theorist specifically is almost like an empowering term.
Yeah, but we also have to acknowledge that the term conspiracy theory is a very overarching terminology, right? Within the conspiracy theory, there are extreme sort of very bonkers idea that COVID sort of you could inject some sort of weird stuff, chips inside your body to combat COVID or to get COVID, whatever, or bees spread. I don't know. I saw it from one of the windows of my neighbor that posted the bees spread COVID. I can't imagine. But on the other hand, exactly like what you said, helping Ukraine would backfire on the United States. That kind of, we could trace it back to the overarching hegemonic media control in the States, which is precisely capitalist function, one of the crucial mechanism in a capitalist machine, the controlled state, the controlled media, not by any sort of other organization, but by the capitalists. They're constantly feeding, and that sort of also has the element plays in a university. Elite education is also part of that mechanism, right?
Yeah, 100%.
When you say there's collusion, there's conspiracy between involved in the Epstein case, people would call you a conspiracy theorist, and now it's been increasingly proven.
Exactly, or like Russiagate, for example. If you said that there was no collusion between Trump and Russia, you were called a conspiracy theorist back then. The American public has faced so many of these like key litmus test issues that the media has condemned everyone for questioning over the past 5 years, that now it's, and sometimes, as you mentioned, it does get into shaky territories, but it causes people to literally question everything.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it feels like. I mean, the kind of belief you have invested in a system that constantly tell lies to you, what it feels like, I can't imagine.
Yeah, I mean, it just causes you to look at, other ways of living life. And I think that's what I was drawn to Marxism and this whole multipolar movement. You mentioned the Great Reset. I love what Alexander Dugin, how he titled his book, The Great Reset versus the Great Awakening. I think that's such an apt way of putting what we're witnessing right now. And I think that's why so many Americans and so many Europeans and so many people, and like what we're seeing in the Sahel region in Africa right now, what we're seeing in China with this multipolar movement, literally the whole world is waking up to this new era that we are living in, and I think it's really beautiful. But it is a complete repudiation of what the past 30 years of the given order has been.
How do we define today's empire, and how do we define today's imperialism? I mean, is there any sort of an answer coming from the MAGA Communist, MAGA Marxist field?
We think that, I think this will be something you can speak to as well, but we think that the American empire is just synonymous with the unipolar order today. It's not simply that America is asserting its national will against other countries. It's almost as if we don't have a national will at all. It's instead faceless bureaucrats and bankers, many of whom have a face in the case of like Carl Schwab. These are just the faces of institutions at work which are responsible for a lot of the disorder and disarray we see in the world, whether it be in the Donbass republics, which sparked, of course, this terrible war, or if it's the case between in the Middle East right now regarding Israel's war on Gaza, the genocide in Gaza. And I think that we talk about imperialism, it's not sustainable. And it's not really a question, again, if we go back to historical materialism, it's not a question of if, but when does this collapse? And what can be salvaged? And you mentioned before, can America simply be a normal country? And I think that's exactly what we're endeavoring to do, what MAGA seeks to do, in just a fundamental and intuitive sense. If you talk with regular guys, if you go out into like the boonies in the US and you talk to people at the bar, they're not interested in sending their friends and their sons and their daughters overseas to die in a pointless war that's not going to benefit them. They know about the horrors of the George Bush's wars. They know about the horrors of these drone strikes and the fact that it wastes billions of dollars when their roads are broken, when their kids are addicted to drugs and pornography, and the government seems to do nothing about it. So anti-imperialism and MAGA, to us, fundamentally go hand in hand. the worry, of course, is that MAGA is not ideologically cohesive. There is no MAGA. There are many orientations to MAGA. And for an example, there's a Steve Bannon wing, which is institutional. It's part of the establishment, which wants to ally with Russia against China. Okay? The danger in which we feel communists should be responsible for is to win over MAGA before MAGA disappears as a dissident sect, basically, in American politics. And to basically do exactly what George Washington said in his farewell address, which is to have no long-standing political entanglements, but just engage in trade, in good faith relations with the rest of the world. How far have we been removed from this today?
Yeah. And I sort of noticed that there's this disconnect between the political will of the state versus the kind of national will. What do people want? What do people want really day-to-day basis? They do not want to go, like you said, to go into distant wars with probably the country they couldn't point it out on a map. So there's this gross disconnect. And then I think America needs to go back to be a country of its own people, for its own people, so that this governance could be more reflective on the general will of the people. Is that?
Yeah, I think Americans just want cheap goods, which we're not going to be able to get if we're sanctioning the rest of the world and bombing the rest of the world. And I think they want.
But you want all the manufacturing back.
I think that would be great too. I think cheap goods.
But it's gonna.
Well, you gotta. But I'm saying if you think about this, if you have manufacturing back, but we're taking our own oil. I mean, if we're doing the raw minerals, the raw resources, it offsets things. You can't have one without the other. I think that, like Russia is a great example of that. Throughout these sanctions, the sanction warfare, they are not only increasing the amount of raw resources that they are pulling out of their own soil, they're not only developing much more in terms of their own national companies and building new companies, they're also doing more trade. We can do it all. We're a great country. We have great minds. We can do it all. I think Americans want safe neighborhoods. And when you have people living in poverty, you don't have safe neighborhoods. So that's a byproduct of not being able to afford basic goods. And I think that they want a country also that celebrates our history rather than says that it's all racist or it's all misogynist. I mean, it's crazy what we're seeing right now. So I think those three things are what most Americans would say are good indicators and of a healthy country. And of course, not getting involved in these foreign entanglements for decades on end is involved in that as well.
I saw a poll from Pew saying like 90% of U.S. citizens don't trust in Congress. So who is actually representing the U.S. citizens?
Who's representing the U.S. people, or who's making the laws?
That could be two questions for you.
I guess who's representing the people is dissident voices that are somewhat heard in the press and more so heard on social media. I mean, if you're talking about our branches of government, like there's virtually nobody with the exception of a few lone Congress members who will sometimes say, hey, maybe we shouldn't go bomb those 7-year-old kids and wherever. It's like, that's the best we're going to get. We don't have anyone who's like truly fighting for an all-encompassing, make America great again, what I would label as that sort of a vision for the future, which is unfortunate because they all call themselves that still. As for who is actually running things, I mean, I think it's just big finance capital. I think it's multinational corporations. I don't think that's a shocking statement from me, but I think that's who it is.
I think it's very valuable that you mentioned the social platform and the medias are actually mitigating public attentions. But we three are all on social media, right? If you think they're doing this job, it's like we imagine there's transparent big ball here. We're all describing, Professor Yin, how the ball looks, how heavy it is. But what game are we in? Precisely. If we know the media, traditional media, are going to kick the ball into a door, that everybody just play the game, talking, discussing how many restrooms we're going to have. Is it 2 or 5 or 137 according to California right now, right? They have this motive saying there are 100-something genders. Yeah. So how do you How do you make this work and make us on the right track or in the right game to play this ball into the right door?
Yeah, I think it's for the West, it's very dangerous because we're getting into this era now where all of the social media outlets are working at the behest of the U.S. government in the sense that, you know, they just ban any dissident voices with the exception of Twitter, X, and Rumble, which is a YouTube alternative. But the largest, you know, the largest actors in our economy right now want to turn social media, which was once a somewhat semi-free institution, into, you know, the mainstream media. They just want to have approved voices, approved narratives. And, you know, I've been banned from YouTube, I've been banned from Twitch, I've been banned from Venmo, PayPal, WhatsApp. I've been banned from various payment processors, merchandise stores, like that. They're very serious about this. And that's what's most dangerous to me is, like, even now on these platforms, we're beginning to lose any sort of freedom.
Yeah, as much as I enjoy this conversation, it has to come to an end because we're running out of time. I want to thank our very good panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.